Hey, friend. So, as my title says, yes, I did read War and Peace in 30 days with a caveat that I will get into in a minute. So, this is not going to be a book review or a whole synopsis on this entire book. This thing is 1,224 pages. There are plenty of other channels out there that do a phenomenal job breaking down every aspect of this book, every character, every plot. That's not what this is about. So, I want to share how this actually happened. So, last year on my birthday, I walked into a Barnes and Noble, which, in my opinion, there's just no better way to spend a birthday than in a bookstore. And I wanted to read something challenging that I had not read before. And War and Peace popped into my mind. So I got this copy and decided I was going to read it in 30 days. I know a lot of people will spend months reading this, 6 months or longer. I thought about that. But because it's so huge, the reason I landed on, just trying for 30 days is because I felt like the longer I dragged it on, the less I would remember what I read a couple months ago. So I wanted the story to stay fresh in my mind. So it ended up being 40 pages a day. And the only reason that I did not finish in 30 consecutive days is my grandmother passed away. So I was about 2/3 of the way through the book, and my grandmother went home to be with Jesus. And so obviously, I did not pick this up, or any book for that matter, for a week or so. I obviously was in shock and, running on adrenaline. And then at some point, I realized my mind needed to be active. It needed something else to focus on than just the grief. And I needed to give my mind an escape. And getting back into reading this was a way to give my mind and my body a way to process grief and suffering alongside the characters in the book who were also experiencing their own suffering. So it kind of felt like having more friends to walk through a really difficult time with. And I did not feel, it made me feel not so alone. And yes, I have wonderful and dear friends and family that walked through that time with me. So I was not actually alone. But I do want to share, okay, well, what were these characters going through? Just a brief backstory. Like, we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of the entire context, but so written by Leo Tolstoy in 1869, I believe. It's set during the Napoleonic Wars, which were between 1805 and 1820. It follows five aristocratic Russian families, but it also follows just the individual lives of people trying to live, just trying to survive. Did not have war on their bingo card, so to speak. So there's three main characters. I mean, there's a whole lot of characters. There's more than three, but I'm just going to highlight, I think, the main three. So we have Pierre Bezukov. I hope I pronounce that right. These are Russian names, so obviously I hope I don't butcher them. He is definitely at the heart of this book. He's an illegitimate son who inherits a vast amount of wealth and property and status. And he spends the whole novel searching for meaning and purpose and God in so many different places. He's a bit awkward, but so sincere and very lost. But he does not give up. The man, I have to give it to him. He doesn't give up. He keeps going. He keeps pursuing. And I think that's part of what makes him so human. Um, I think he's probably the most relatable character in the story. And then we have Prince Andre. I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name. He is young, brilliant, proud, ambitious, and he's off chasing glory and meaning and um, other things through military heroism, and learns through his own immense suffering that glory and ambition are not going to fill the void that he feels so profoundly. And then the other important character, they're all important, but the main character is Natasha Rostov. So she is young, youthful, beautiful, so naive to the ways of the world and just how life really is in the real world. I think she's personified as heartbreak, but that's not the only arc of her story. I think her story really shows that love ultimately is not a feeling. It is that animating force of life itself. And I really enjoyed her character. So what the heck is this thing? Like, what is it actually about? That is really hard to nail down in one sentence. So I have a few notes. I have a few bullet points because it's not just one thing. Yes, it's a novel, but it's not just a novel. It is a sweeping family saga and a love story. It is a military history of Napoleon's invasion of Russia. It is a philosophical treatise on free will and fate and the meaning of history. It is also, a theological meditation, if you will, on God, the soul, how humans behave. And it's also kind of a societal critique on the Russian aristocracy of the time, people performing wealth and status while completely disconnected from what actually matters in life. So Tolstoy, I don't think, is asking, how do I live a good life? I think he's asking some more fundamental questions, and I think maybe even a bit more unsettling. It's what is actually driving human beings to make the choices that we make. Do we have as much free will as we think that we do? Yes, we do have free will. So Napoleon is obviously an important character in the story, and I think Tolstoy is almost a bit savage about him. Napoleon believed that he was reshaping history, through sheer will and his genius and how incredible he was. And I think Tolstoy is arguing the opposite. Napoleon was really just a cork bobbing in the waves of the ocean that he did not create and really could not stop. It's also about the invasion of Russia, but the hundreds of thousands of deaths, meaningless and senseless deaths, the burning of Moscow. Ultimately, this was a war of ego that was, in Napoleon's mind, mistaken for divine destiny. This was completely Napoleon's ego, and it accomplished nothing of value. It just brought death and destruction. And this is where I think it gets interesting. The characters who find peace, not just, peace isn't just the absence of war, but there's like an inner peace aspect to it. The characters who find peace in this book are not the ones that are mastering their circumstances and how everything is just hunky-dory and roses. They realize that, there's things outside of their control that they can't control. And they learn that lesson the hard way. What they can control is their own responses. And how true is that still to this day? So the whole 40-page a day structure, for me, it became so much more than a reading goal or something to check off my list for that day. It became an anchor for me. And every character in War and Peace suffers. They suffer deeply, profoundly, and there's no easy rescue. They just have to walk through it. They just have to keep putting one foot in front of another. And it was a bit of a page turner, in my opinion. And I didn't realize that this was exactly what I needed at that time. I think that's how books operate. Sometimes you have something on your shelf or you have a thought in your mind of, I'd love to read this book someday. And then someday comes and somehow you end up reading the books that you need to read at that moment. So this became something for my mind to hold on to. Reading about characters processing their own grief and processing their own suffering, it gave me language for these emotions that I couldn't really articulate that well. So, yes, this book had a profound effect on me. The structure started out as a fun challenge, but yeah, it became an anchor point for me. This forward motion when that wave of grief just wanted to pull me under. So I am always going to be very grateful to Tolstoy for this. And there's actually a passage in this that I wanted to end the video on. It's near the end of the book, and I'll leave this with you. It's about Natasha, and she's just experienced a profound loss, and it's so devastating that she starts to believe that her life is just over, that it's hopeless. And then Tolstoy writes this: a wound in the soul, coming from the rending of the spiritual body, strange as it may seem, gradually closes like a physical wound. And once a deep wound heals over and the edges seem to have knit, a wound in the soul, like a physical wound, can be healed only by the force of life pushing up from the inside. This is the way Natasha's wound healed. She thought her life was over, but suddenly her love for her mother showed her that the essence of life, love, was still alive in her. Love awoke and life awoke. I love that. Man, I read I read those words and I thought, that's me. That is me. And maybe you find yourself in those words as well. Um, it's like towards the end of the book, in the middle of grief, love awoke, life awoke. And I'm not taking anything for granted. So, if you enjoyed this video, like, share, subscribe, all the things. I would also love to know if you've read War and Peace, what you thought about it, and if you haven't read it, but you've thought about reading it, has this inspired you to read it? This has truly become one of my favorite books, and I want to read it again someday. I'm going to give it a break. I've got some other great books I want to read, but someday I would love to reread this. And that brings us to the end. Thanks for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will talk to you later.